G'day guys, it's Paul from Polyman Astro, and I thought I'd do a video today on something I haven't done yet, which is looking at my current workflow for narrowband imaging. I've done a fair few videos on some of the tools I use, but I've never really done a whole processing workflow. This is going to be a bit of a speed run, so we're not sitting here for 40 minutes. I'll try and be as quick as I can, but anything that you want more clarification on, please let me know in the comments, and I can go deeper into that section if that's what interests you. And the workflow I'm using is actually to produce the image you can see behind me on Gabriella Mistral. It's the same data I've been using in a few other episodes because unfortunately, I've said it before, we've had 6 months of non-stop rain and it just does not look like it's ever going to end. I've had 2 nights imaging in 6 months. It's just ridiculous. But the color palette I'm using is something that's non-standard. It's not just straight SHO or anything like that. It's known around as 4-ax, and it comes from this tutorial just here on dynamic narrowband combinations with pixel math by The Coldest Nights. And he goes through and explains what he means by dynamic expressions using pixel math. It's a fascinating read. You can see the link up there if you'd like to jump in. I'll put a link in the description as well. But that's the color palette that I'm going to use. So let's dive in. All right, so I have my 3 images here. I'll screen transfer function them so that we can see them, and S2 as well. So I've got my HA, my O3 and my S2. First thing that I'm going to do to each of them is give them reasonable names because they're pretty crazy named at the moment. So HA, O3, and S2. So now I've got something decent to work with. And the first thing that I've done is I've already gone through and done dynamic background extraction and noise reduction. I've got a video on the noise reduction settings that I use, but they're right here if you want to have a look under multiscale linear transform. And I use the linear mask option so that it creates one for me, which is quite nice. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to go at this point to go non-linear. And the way I do that is I go into GHS, which I'm using a lot. Again, I've done videos on this. So we'll do HA first. And I'm going to do a few different stretches on HA. And the way this tool works, if you haven't watched my videos, is I can zoom into the initial linear histogram, which is right on the left-hand edge. This isn't actually stretching it, it's just so I can see it. And what I want to do is I want to choose a point just to the right of the histogram here, or just to the left. It's up to you where you work on that, and you can play around with it. I've just clicked there and it's created this blue line, and it's telling me where on the histogram that is. And I'm going to use that as my symmetry point. 00135 is going to be my symmetry point. And I am going to use an intensity factor of 10, and what that's going to do is concentrate most of the stretch around this symmetry point. And then I'm going to pull the zoom back so that I can actually watch the stretch. And I don't want to go too far. I think around here's not too bad, maybe a bit more. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so there's my first stretch done, and then it'll go crazy because it reapplies that stretch to the preview. So I've got to reset. And now what I want to do is start building up some contrast in the image a little bit, because it comes out a little bit flat. The stars are nicely controlled, which is good. So what I'll do is I tend to go to the preview here, and I start looking at areas that I'd like to start introducing some contrast. So 3, 1, 4, 8, 4, 8. Whoops, that's pretty dark there. 2, 2. Okay, so in the darker regions here, we're looking around the 2, 2. And I want to try and pull that fainter dust up if I can, but not risk pulling up the background. So I reckon somewhere around the 2, 4 mark might be a good spot there to be safe. I don't want my stretch to be quite as restricted, so local intensity of 5 means it'll spread the stretch out a little bit more. And I obviously, if I pull this too extreme, it's just going to go crazy, so I don't want that. So these secondary stretches are generally quite shallow, quite small. So I'm looking about 0.4 there, looks pretty good. It's definitely pulled out a little bit more contrast, a little bit more punch. And we might do one more. We might do one more. 0.6 there, so that region's too bright. I'm still thinking I want more punch in these kind of areas here. But at the lower end, but not too low. So I think somewhere around there, about the 0.4 mark maybe, for the symmetry point might be a good spot for that. I want this even more spread out, and again, I do not want much of a stretch here. And you can see it's pulled the histogram back a bit, which is nice. It's darkened the background nicely, and it's definitely made the image a bit more punchy. Okay, so that's my HA done. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for O3 and S2, so I won't bore you with those. I'll fast forward this bit so that it moves through a little bit quicker. Okay, so that's my 3 images now stretched using GHS. But you can see the backgrounds. The backgrounds on the HA and the S2 are pretty similar, but the O3 is still a bit bright. So I might use my histogram transformation just to bring that background in line with the other two. So just pull in that peak. Maybe not that quite extreme. Give a little bit of wiggle room. All right, so they should all be pretty similar now. Fantastic. So now we're ready to combine the images and work on them from there. But I still think my O3 and my S2 aren't quite as punchy as I'd like. So I might even use GHS one more time on those two, just to boost them up a little bit. So again, I'm going to choose a point just to the right on the histogram, 0.8. Going to go big on the stretch intensity, just to brighten them up a little bit. So there's O3 brightened up a little bit. And then I'll do the same thing to S2. Except I'll change the symmetry point on it to 0.95. Again, I want to be just to the right on the histogram on that. There we go. Now we might have to adjust the black points a little bit on those again. So let's fix those up. Histogram transformation. Reset. Just a touch. Now let's do O3. Oh, sorry, S2. Okay, S2 needs a fair bit. And there we go. Okay, so we've brightened those two up a bit just to bring them closer in line with the HA. We might have bloated the stars a little bit. I could have done Starnet to remove the stars before I did that, but that's all right. They look pretty good. In fact, when I did it for my image that you saw in the background, I did actually remove the stars before I brightened them there, but I don't think it's going to have a massive impact, especially when we look at the luminance shortly. Okay, let's combine these images now into our 4x, and I've actually got a pixel math expression here set up. This is the 4x expression, and it's got an R, G, and a B component, and then it's going to create a new image which I've called 4x. And basically what the red component is doing, if you look, it's O3 to the power of, not O3, it's a power of inverted pixels expression. And basically what this is saying is if where O3 is strong, then it's going to take S2, and where O3 is not strong, it's going to take HA in the red component. For G, it's looking at where O3 and HA are both strong, and that's where it's going to take HA, and where they're not both strong, that's where it's going to take O3, and then the B expression is just O3. Okay, so it's not quite a HOO expression. but it's along those lines. But what it's going to do is produce some nice deep reds and pinks and some oranges in there as well. And it should give some nice blue where the oxygen is. Oops, got to apply, not try and make it go global. Okay, so here we go. Here's our initial 4-ax image. So I'll close these three H, O, and S images now. So here's our 4-ax image, and you can see it's got some nice reds and oranges and some cyans and blues, which looks kind of more of a natural palette than SHO, but it gives some nice differentiation between the three gases, which is nice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a luminance image, because this is currently the RGB component. What I want to do now is create a luminance, and I've got some other pixel math expressions here for that. And basically, again, it's a similar idea, dynamic expressions. What it's going to do to my HA image, this image here, what it's going to do is where HA and S2 are strong, it's going to take HA, and where they're not both strong, that's where it's going to take S2. Okay, and it's going to apply it to the HA image. So it's going to be a subtle adjustment. And then I'm going to do the same thing with HA and O3, where HA and O3 are both strong, it's going to take HA. Where they're not both strong, it's going to take O3. And I just find it's a nice way of incorporating some of the S2 and O3 data into my strongest channel, which is the HA, to produce a nice luminance with minimal noise, but it's still got some of the structure from S2 and O3 in it. So now we can work on this image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the stars using Starnet. Again, this is going to take some time, so I'll start it and then I'll fast forward it. All right, Starnet's finished. So I've got my star mask, which I'll minimize out the way, and I've got my starless image. Now you can see, because I've done some quite decent stretching here, there's quite a few stars left in this image. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a range selection on this, and on range selection I use screening, which produces basically like a luminance mask, a luminosity mask, so it keeps the structure that's in there. I might smooth this out just a touch, so now it's not quite so harsh. And what I'll do is I'll clone stamp out some of these stars in a second. So I'll just drop the upper limit on that a little bit. I might even pull the upper limit in, and that might pull some of those stars out. No, I'll leave that. Okay, so I'll create the range mask. Now what I often have to do with range masks is also tie in clone stamp as well. So I use the clone stamp tool and just stamp out these stars and any extra bits that are in there. Any extraneous bits that I don't think I really need. Now I'll have to be a bit more careful, so I might zoom in a bit on this bright star that's actually in the nebula here. So I'll change the radius on this down to say 50 maybe. What I want to do is kind of clone stamp this out, just so it doesn't have, oops, let's take that back a bit, just so it doesn't have quite that much of a ring on it. Doesn't have to be perfect, because the star is going to come back and cover it. Yeah, that's about as good as it's going to get, I think. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. Okay, so that's the range mask done. Often I'd be much more careful than that. Now I can choose the range mask, and then I can show and hide it up here, because I don't actually want to see it. And the reason I'm doing this, what I want to do is I want to start doing some local contrast enhancement to further make this nebula pop. So what I tend to do is I start really low and at the maximum contrast and the maximum amount. Often this is too much. So if I try this, so at this low amount, often what you'll see is some really nice small scale structure pop. But if I jump backwards and forwards here, hopefully you can see it, it's kind of producing some artifacts that I don't think really exist. So I tend to start boosting this up a little bit if I can. So I might go to around 20 here. Yeah, still don't think it's quite there. 24, 25 maybe. Yeah, that's a bit better. It's not producing any of those crazy artifacts, but it is producing this nice rim of light here. But I think it's too strong. So now I'll drop the amount down. I want it to be subtle. Yeah, I think that's more to my liking. So let's try that one. So I tend to find for my images with my refractor, somewhere around the 24 to 32 marks, good for that small scale structure. Then I'll often run a pass at 80. So I might need to look somewhere a bit bigger than that. Maybe in here. Let's see what that looks like. So often I'll run at 80 here. I forgot to start at 1 for the amount again. So I start at full amount and then I dial it down once I see a region I want. Actually, that looks quite good at 1. Let's leave that at 1. That doesn't often happen. Normally I have to pull the amount right down. And then I'll try one more run at somewhere really wide, like 256. But you can see that what that's really making the nebula pop. But yeah, again, that's probably too much, maybe 0.5. It's kind of like dodging and burning, really. That looks okay. But there we go. So it's made a quite drastic improvement. Next thing I often run is either MLT sharpening or unsharp mask. Unsharp mask is much easier to work with because there's not much to play around with. So I'll go back to that preview here again and we'll run that. And this is almost always at its default way too strong. You can see how much grain and noise it's created there. So I might even knock that back to somewhere like 0.4. There you go. It's sharpening, but it's not producing all that nasty grain. There we go. We've done our contrast enhancement. We've done our sharpening. Now I can take the mask off and I can put the stars back. And to do that, I use pixel math again. Just make sure you've got single expression. And what I want to do is, the image is called HA, and I want to add back, the star mask, not the Stark mask. And it was called star mask. So just make sure you keep track of any numbers that are there. So HA plus star mask, and that'll pop the stars back. Okay, so that's our luminance now, this HA image. So I can now do an LRGB on my 4x image, wherever that's gone. Oh, there it is, 4x1. So I'll go to all processes, LRGB, and normally by default, everything's ticked here. I just want to do the luminance channel, and I want it to be my HA. Okay, and I'm going to drag that onto my 4x image, and that should make quite a difference. Look at that. What a difference. Go back one, all that structure that's now in there. Fantastic. Now what we need to do is start working on boosting up some of that saturation and things like that. So the first thing I tend to do is work on the hue and saturation. So the saturation is the pink here. All I've done for that is I've pulled up from the middle here quite drastically, and you'll see the effect that has. It's probably too excessive here. Drag that down a bit. And then I've worked on the hue. Again, that's probably too excessive there. Let's pull that down a bit. Yeah, it's gone purple there. We don't want that. Maybe even down. Oops. Maybe even down a little bit more. I want to pull that blue a bit deeper, but I don't want it to go purple. Okay, so there we go. So we've boosted the boosted the saturation, and we've turned this sickly green cyan to, there's still some green in there. That's important. I hate when green completely disappears from my images. So there is still some green there, but it's just turned that sickly cyan to some more blue, which is what I want. And we've boosted the saturation. The next thing I often do is, if I zoom in here, you can see there is some oranges, which I really like. So I want to boost those oranges just a touch. Okay. And then the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this range mask, because this section here is fainter than here. So I'm going to boost just this bit of nebulosity. So on my range mask, I'm actually going to take my clone stamp tool again. I'm going to make the brush size maximum. And on this image, it's control. On this image, it's quite easy to do because, it's so separate from each other. I'm just going to eliminate the main part of Gabriella and just leave that wispy faint bit. And then I'll just be able to stretch that section. So there is my range mask now isolated for just that bit of nebulosity. So now I can boost that. So I'm just going to do it with histogram because it's nice and quick. And you'll see I have to be pretty extreme here with the stretch on that. But of course what that does is it reduces the saturation. So that's all this last little bit is doing. It's just a crazy extreme saturation boost just to bring back those reds. And there we go. There is my 4-ax image. Often I'd be a lot more careful with it than I have been here, but you get the gist of what I'm doing. Individually stretching my channels so they're all roughly equal to each other in terms of intensity and background. Combine them into a 4-ax image or an SHO or whatever you're doing. And then I can work on creating illuminance, working on the local contrast enhancement and sharpening, and then boosting, at the end, boosting saturation and hue and things like that. So there we go. So that was a bit of a speed run, like I said, through my current workflow on narrowband imaging. Sometimes I'll throw in a few extra processes here and there, but that's basically all I do for my imaging at the moment. I like to keep things fairly simple. I just don't have the data to finesse things too much, unfortunately. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions or you'd like me to go into more detail on a few steps, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.